They called her species fragile. They said humans were soft creatures from a small wet rock spinning at the edge of a forgotten arm of the Milky Way galaxy. They laughed when they heard a human had been accepted into the Velaran Military Academy, the most brutal and respected training ground in the known universe. For 600 galactic cycles, no human had ever set foot inside those walls, and when one finally did, she was not a towering warrior. She was not a loudmouth with fire in her throat. She was a girl who barely spoke, who kept her eyes low, who walked like she was trying not to be seen. And that, as the galaxy would soon learn, was the most dangerous thing about her. This is not a story about someone who wanted to prove herself. This is a story about someone who had already been broken and rebuilt so many times that proving herself was no longer the point. The point was something far more terrifying to those who stood against her. The point was survival. And humans, as every species in the galaxy would eventually discover, do not just survive, they adapt. They endure. They outlast everything. Remember that. Because what happened inside the walls of the Velaran Academy did not just change one girl's life, it changed the way the entire galaxy looked at the small, quiet species from Earth. The shuttle descended through a sky that was not blue. It was a deep, bruised purple, streaked with lines of gold where the twin suns of the Valoris system cut through the upper atmosphere. The light came in at sharp angles, painting everything in long shadows. Below the shuttle, the Valoran Military Academy spread across a vast plateau of dark stone, its buildings carved directly into the rock like the bones of some ancient creature pushing up through the surface of the planet. Elara Voss sat in the back row of the shuttle. She had her knees pulled up close to her chest, and her hands were folded tight in her lap. Her bag, a worn military duffel with a broken strap she had repaired with wire, sat between her boots on the floor. She had not spoken a single word during the entire 9-hour flight from the orbital transfer station. Around her, the other incoming cadets filled the shuttle with noise. There were 12 of them in total. Most were Corvathi, a species known for their immense size and natural bone armor that grew along their spines and forearms. They stood almost 8 feet tall and had deep voices that vibrated through the metal walls of the shuttle when they laughed. 2 of them were arm wrestling in the aisle, their massive forearms slamming against each other while the others cheered. There were also 3 Sindari cadets, tall and lean with silver skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their faces. They were known across the galaxy for their speed and their ability to process visual information faster than any other known species. They sat together near the front, speaking in their own language, a series of rapid clicking sounds that rose and fell like music. And then there was a single Derailith. His name, Elara would later learn, was Torvan. He sat alone near the middle of the shuttle, arms crossed over his wide chest, his dark green scales catching the light every time the shuttle banked. Derailiths were considered the most naturally gifted warriors in the known galaxy. Their reflexes were nearly instantaneous. Their skin could resist low-caliber energy blasts. Their muscles were dense enough to bend steel. Torvan was the son of a decorated Derailith general, and everyone on the shuttle already knew his name. Nobody knew Elara's name. Nobody had looked at her since she boarded. She preferred it that way. The shuttle touched down with a heavy thud, and the rear doors opened to let in the hot, dry air of Valoris. The cadets filed out in a loose group, their boots crunching on the dark gravel of the landing pad. Elara was the last to step off. She slung her bag over one shoulder, squinting against the sharp golden light, and followed the group toward a wide stone staircase that led up to the main entrance of the academy. A formation of senior cadets stood at the top of the stairs, watching the new arrivals approach. They wore dark grey uniforms with silver trim, and their postures were rigid and still. Among them stood a tall Corvathi woman with deep scars across her face, and one arm that had been replaced with a cybernetic prosthetic made of blackened metal. She was Senior Commander Drethka, the head of first cycle training at the academy. She had trained more elite soldiers than any living instructor in the Valoran system, and she had a reputation for breaking cadets who did not belong. Drethka watched the new cadets climb the stairs. Her eyes moved from one to the next, reading their posture, their stride, the way they carried themselves. She noted the Corvathi cadets with mild approval. She gave a slight nod when Torvan passed, and then her eyes landed on the small figure at the back of the group, and her expression shifted. It was not surprise. Drethka had been briefed on the human cadet. She had read the file. She knew the girl's scores on the entrance examination, which had been against all expectation, high enough to qualify. But seeing a human in person was different. The girl was short. Her frame was slight compared to every other species on the landing pad. She had no natural armor, no visible claws, no enhanced musculature. Her skin was soft and unprotected. Her eyes were just two, round and dark, set in a face that showed no particular emotion. Drethka's jaw tightened. She turned to the officer standing beside her and said quietly, "That one will not last the week." The officer glanced down at the human and nodded in agreement. Alara did not hear the words, but she felt the weight of the look. She had felt looks like that her entire life. She had learned long ago that the opinions people formed in the first 5 seconds of seeing her were almost always wrong. But she had also learned that correcting those opinions with words was a waste of breath. The only language that mattered was action, and action required patience. So she kept her head down. The main hall of the academy was enormous. The ceiling was vaulted and carved with images of ancient Valoran battles, warriors locked in combat with creatures and enemies from across the galaxy. The floor was polished dark stone, and the sound of boots echoed in the vast space. Along the walls, banners hung from iron rods, each one representing a graduating class of cadets. Some of those banners were hundreds of years old, their fabric thin and faded. The newest one, bright and sharp, bore the emblem of the most recent graduating class, the image of a burning star clutched in a gauntleted fist. The cadets were lined up in the center of the hall. Drethka walked slowly in front of them, her cybernetic arm clicking faintly with every step. She stopped and faced them. "You are here because you believe you are exceptional," she said. Her voice was low and hard, like stone grinding against stone. "You are not. You are raw material. You are unfinished. Some of you will be shaped into something useful. Most of you will break." She paused and let the silence press down on them. "This academy does not care where you come from. It does not care what species you are. It does not care about your family name or your homeworld or the stories you have been told about your own greatness. It cares about one thing only: results." Her eyes swept the line of cadets and stopped briefly on Alara. "You will be tested. You will be measured. And if you are found lacking, you will be sent home. There is no shame in leaving early. The shame is in staying when you do not belong." The words were not aimed at anyone in particular, but every cadet in the line glanced sideways at the human girl standing at the end. She was the smallest person in the room by a significant margin. Her shoulders barely reached the elbow of the Corvathi cadet standing next to her, and she stood there, perfectly still, with no expression on her face, as if the entire speech had passed through her, without touching anything inside. After the formation, the cadets were assigned to their barracks. The rooms were built for larger species, so everything was oversized for Alara. The bunks were high, the chairs were wide, and the training armor hanging in the lockers looked like it had been designed for bodies twice her size. She had been assigned a room with 3 other cadets, 2 Corvathi and 1 Sindari. The Corvathi were brothers named Goruk and Thren. They were loud, competitive, and treated everything like a contest. Within the first 5 minutes of entering the room, they had already challenged each other to see who could do more pull-ups on the overhead bar. Goruk won with 37. Thren threw a boot at him. The Sindari was a female named Scylla. She was quieter than the brothers, but no less confident. She moved through the room with the fluid grace of her species, unpacking her things with all 4 of her hands while her 4 eyes tracked everything happening around her at once. She glanced at Alara when the human entered, studied her for a long moment, and then turned away without a word. Alara unpacked in silence. She placed her few belongings in the locker assigned to her, changed into the standard-issue training uniform, which was too large in the shoulders and too long in the sleeves, and sat on the edge of her bunk. The mattress was firm and cool. She placed her hands flat on either side of her and breathed slowly. Goruk, the larger of the 2 Corvathi brothers, looked at her from across the room and grinned. His teeth were wide and flat, built for crushing, and his grin made his already broad face look even wider. "So you are the human," he said. Alara looked at him. She did not respond. "I thought you would be bigger," he said, "or at least louder. Every human I have seen on the net is always screaming about something." Thren laughed from his bunk. "Maybe she is broken." "She is not broken," Scylla said, not looking up from her unpacking. "She is assessing."
"Assessing what?"
Scylla's upper pair of eyes flicked toward Alara, then back to her bag. "Everything." Goruk shrugged and went back to his pull-ups. Ilara said nothing, but something shifted behind her eyes, a faint flicker of awareness, like a predator cataloguing the terrain. She noted the dimensions of the room, the distance between the bunks, the weight and balance of the training armor in the locker. She noted the way Goruk favored his left side when he pulled himself up, the slight hitch in Thren's right knee when he stood, the rhythm of Scylla's breathing, and the tiny delay in her lower left hand compared to her other three. She noticed everything. She always had. That was the thing about being small and quiet in a universe full of loud, powerful creatures. Nobody watched you, but you watched everyone. The first meal in the Academy mess hall was an experience that Ilara endured rather than enjoyed. The hall was enormous, filled with long metal tables and benches built for large bodies. The food was served from automated dispensers along the far wall, each one calibrated to the nutritional needs of different species. The human dispenser was at the very end of the row, small and dusty, clearly unused for a long time. Ilara took her tray and sat at the far end of a table, alone. The food was bland but edible. A dense protein block, a cup of nutrient broth, and a piece of something that resembled bread but had the texture of packed clay. She ate slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly, her eyes moving steadily around the room. The mess hall was divided into unofficial territories. The Corvity cadets dominated the center tables, their voices booming and their laughter shaking the metal surfaces. The Sindari kept to one corner, their conversations rapid and precise. The Draeliths, including Torvan, sat at a table near the door, speaking in low tones. Every species had its group, its hierarchy, its unspoken rules. Ilara had no group. She sat alone and watched. At one point, a large Corvathi cadet from another barracks walked past her table, glanced down at her, and snorted. He said something to the cadet beside him in Corvathi. The translation implant in Ilara's ear caught the words clearly. They let a prey animal into the academy. The cadets around him laughed. Ilara continued eating. Later that evening, the cadets were gathered in a briefing room for their orientation to the training schedule. The room was shaped like an amphitheater with curved rows of seats descending toward a central platform where Drethka stood beside a large holographic display. "Your first training session will begin at dawn," Drethka said. "It will be a baseline assessment. Combat simulation. Individual performance. No teams, no allies. You will face a series of combat constructs in the simulation chamber. The constructs will adapt to your species, your size, and your known capabilities. Your performance will be recorded and ranked." A murmur went through the room. The cadets shifted in their seats, some with excitement, some with nervousness. "Rankings will be posted publicly after each session," Drethka continued. "The lowest ranked cadet after each cycle will receive additional remedial training. The lowest ranked cadet at the end of the first month will be evaluated for removal." Her eyes found Ilara again. This time, Ilara looked back. Their gazes met and held for a moment. Drethka's expression was unreadable. Ilara's was the same. Then Drethka looked away and continued the briefing. That night, the barracks were quiet. The twin suns had set, and the sky outside the narrow window was a deep, starless black. Goruk and Thren were asleep, their heavy breathing filling the room like the sound of a slow engine. Scylla was still, her 4 eyes closed, her breathing perfectly even. Ilara lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. She was not asleep. She was thinking. She was running simulations in her mind, calculating distances, speeds, angles. She was thinking about every combat tutorial she had studied, every training vid she had watched, every fight she had survived back on Earth before the recruitment officers had found her. She thought about her mother. She thought about the apartment on the 47th floor of a crumbling housing block in a city that never stopped raining. She thought about the day the recruiters came, 2 officers from the United Earth Defense Coalition, their uniforms clean and pressed in a building where nothing was clean or pressed. They had told her she had scored in the top fraction of a percent on the aptitude tests. They told her she had options. They told her the galaxy was bigger than the 47th floor. She had not believed them, but she had gone anyway, because staying meant dying slowly, and going meant dying with a chance. Now she was here, on a planet with a purple sky and twin suns, surrounded by creatures who could break her body with one hand, about to walk into a combat simulation designed for warriors of species that had been fighting wars since before humans had discovered fire. She closed her eyes. She was not afraid. Fear was a luxury she had stopped affording a long time ago. What she felt was something colder, something sharper. It was focus. It was the slow, deliberate narrowing of her entire mind down to a single point, like a blade being drawn from a sheath. Tomorrow they would see what a human could do, and they would not understand it. Not at first, because what humans did best was not strength, and it was not speed, and it was not any single physical trait that could be measured or ranked on a chart. What humans did best was something that could not be quantified. It refused to stop. Ella breathed in, breathed out, and let the silence wrap around her like armor. Dawn would come soon enough. The alarm that woke the cadets was not a sound. It was a vibration, a deep pulse that came up through the floor and into the bones. It hit at exactly 0400 hours, and within seconds the barracks were alive with movement. Goruk rolled off his bunk with a heavy thud, already reaching for his training gear. Thren cursed in Corvathy and stumbled toward the lockers. Scylla was already dressed, standing by the door with all four arms folded, watching the others with a calm that bordered on boredom. Ilara was already awake. She had been awake for an hour. Sitting cross-legged on her bunk in the dark, her breathing slow and controlled. When the vibration came, she simply unfolded herself, stood, and began pulling on her training gear with quiet efficiency. The uniform was still too large for her. She had spent part of the previous night adjusting the fit using the small toolkit she had brought from Earth, tightening straps, folding excess material, securing the loose ends so nothing would flap or catch during movement. It was not perfect, but it was functional. The whole way outside the barracks was crowded with cadets moving toward the simulation wing. The air was thick with tension and adrenaline. Some cadets were stretching, rolling their shoulders, cracking the joints in their necks. Others were talking loudly, boasting about what they planned to do in the assessment. A group of Corvathy cadets were slapping each other on the back with enough force to stagger a lesser species. Torvan, the Drelith, walked alone at the front of the crowd, his dark green scales catching the overhead lights. He did not speak. He did not look at anyone. He moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had never doubted his own ability. Ilara walked at the back. She matched the pace of the group, but kept a few meters of distance between herself and the nearest cadet. Her eyes were forward, her hands relaxed at her sides. She looked like someone walking to a routine appointment, not someone about to enter a combat simulation designed to push elite alien soldiers to their limits. The simulation wing was located deep inside the academy, carved into the rock beneath the main campus. The cadets descended a wide spiral ramp that went down several levels, the temperature dropping with each turn. The walls shifted from polished stone to raw rock, veined with thin lines of bioluminescent mineral that cast a pale blue glow over everything. The air smelled of ozone and cold metal. At the bottom of the ramp, they entered a massive chamber. The ceiling was high enough that the top was lost in shadow. The floor was smooth and flat, a vast circle of dark composite material marked with grid lines that glowed faintly. Along the walls, observation platforms jutted out at regular intervals, each one enclosed in transparent shielding. Senior cadets and instructors were already taking their positions on these platforms, looking down into the arena like spectators at an ancient coliseum. Drethka stood in the center of the floor. She held a datapad in her cybernetic hand and wore her usual expression of controlled severity. Beside her stood a tall, thin alien that Ilara did not recognize. A species with translucent skin through which faint pulses of light traveled like signals through fiber optics. This was the simulation technician, responsible for running the combat constructs that the cadets would face. "Line up!" Drethka commanded. The cadets formed a single line along one edge of the arena. There were 43 of them in total, the full incoming class. Ilara took her place at the far end of the line, next to a Sindari cadet who stood nearly 2 feet taller than her. The Sindari glanced down, blinked all four eyes in sequence, and looked away. Drethka walked slowly along the line, her boots clicking against the floor. She stopped in the center and faced them. "This is your baseline assessment. You will enter the simulation chamber one at a time. Inside, you will face a series of combat constructs. The constructs will begin at a low difficulty and increase progressively. Your session ends when you are neutralized or when you choose to yield. Your performance will be scored based on time survived, constructs defeated, damage sustained, and tactical efficiency." She paused. "The constructs are calibrated to your species. They will match your expected physical capabilities and adjust their behavior based on your responses. This is not a test of brute strength alone. It is a test of everything you are. Your instincts, your decision-making.
Your ability to adapt under pressure.
She looked at the datapad in her hand. You will go in alphabetical order by species designation. Dreliths first. Torvan stepped forward without being called by name. He walked to the center of the arena and stood on the activation circle, a ring of light embedded in the floor. The simulation technician touched a series of controls on a panel that floated beside them like a sheet of glass hanging in the air. The lights in the chamber dimmed. The air around Torvan shimmered. And then the simulation activated. The world around him changed. The flat arena floor rippled and transformed into a rocky landscape, a canyon with high walls and uneven terrain. From the shadows at the edges of the simulation, the first construct emerged. It was a bipedal combat drone, built to mimic the size and speed of a Drelith opponent. It moved fast, closing the distance in 3 long strides, and attacked with a sweeping strike aimed at Torvan's midsection. Torvan moved like liquid. He sidestepped the blow with a turn of his hips, caught the construct's arm at the joint, and twisted. The construct's arm shattered with a sound like breaking glass. Torvan followed with a spinning elbow strike that connected with the construct's head and sent it flying backward in a shower of sparks and debris. The watching cadets erupted in murmurs of admiration. Even Drethka's expression softened by the smallest fraction. The simulation sent more constructs, 2 at once, then 3. They came from different angles, using the canyon walls for cover, attacking in coordinated patterns. Torvan dispatched them with brutal efficiency. His movements were precise and powerful, each strike landing exactly where it needed to, each dodge timed to the millisecond. He fought the way his species had fought for thousands of years, with an almost genetic understanding of combat that was woven into every fiber of his being. His session lasted 14 minutes. He neutralized 23 constructs before the simulation escalated to a level that finally overwhelmed him. A squad of 6 elite-tier constructs that attacked simultaneously from all directions. Even then, he took down 4 of them before a heavy blow to his ribs sent him to the floor. He yielded with a sharp word, and the simulation dissolved around him. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the cadets began to applaud. Torvan stood, rolled his shoulders, and walked back to the line without acknowledging the reaction. His score appeared on a holographic display above the arena. It was the highest opening score the Academy had seen in 3 cycles. Drethka nodded once. Next, the assessments continued through the morning. The Korvathi cadets performed well, their raw strength allowing them to overpower constructs through sheer force, though their tactical flexibility was limited. Several of them simply charged headfirst into groups of constructs and relied on their natural armor to absorb damage while they swung wildly. It was effective to a point, but their scores reflected a lack of finesse. Gorak lasted 11 minutes and defeated 18 constructs. Thren lasted 9 minutes and defeated 15. Both were satisfied with their results. The Sindari cadets performed differently. They used their speed and superior visual processing to dodge and weave, striking at weak points with surgical precision. Their sessions were elegant and efficient, but they lacked the raw stopping power to handle the higher-tier constructs. Scylla was the best among them, lasting 12 minutes and defeating 20 constructs, her 4 eyes tracking every threat simultaneously while her body moved in fluid, almost choreographed patterns. Other species followed. Some performed well. Some did not. A Korvathi cadet panicked when surrounded and was neutralized in under 3 minutes. A Sindari cadet misjudged a dodge and took a construct's fist directly to the chest, ending the session immediately. The range of performances was wide, but most cadets fell somewhere in the middle, lasting between 6 and 12 minutes, defeating between 10 and 20 constructs. And then there was only one name left on the list. Voss, Alara, human. The chamber went quiet, not the respectful quiet that had preceded Torvan's session, or the focused quiet that came before each new cadet's turn. This was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of anticipation mixed with something close to pity. Every eye in the chamber turned toward the far end of the line where Alara stood. She stepped forward. She walked to the center of the arena with the same steady, unhurried pace she used for everything. Her boots made almost no sound on the composite floor. Her arms hung loose at her sides. She stepped onto the activation circle and stopped. From the observation platforms above, a senior Korvathi cadet leaned toward the one beside him and said, 20 credits says she does not last 2 minutes. I will take that bet, the other replied. I say 90 seconds. On the arena floor, the simulation technician paused. They looked at Drethka with an expression that, despite the alien nature of their translucent features, clearly communicated uncertainty. The human calibration profile is outdated, the technician said, their voice carrying a harmonic quality, as if multiple tones were speaking at once. The last human assessment was conducted over 600 cycles ago. The constructs may not be properly scaled. Drethka looked at Alara. Proceed with the standard calibration. If it is too easy, the system will adjust. The technician nodded and activated the simulation. The arena changed around Alara. The flat floor transformed into an urban environment, a maze of low walls, broken pillars, and narrow corridors. The lighting shifted to a dim, reddish hue. Shadows pulled in the corners and behind the walls. Alara did not move immediately. She stood in the center of the activation zone and looked around. Her head turned slowly, her dark eyes scanning every angle, every shadow, every piece of cover. She noted the height of the walls, the width of the corridors, the distance between obstacles. She listened to the ambient sounds of the simulation, the faint hum of the constructs powering up somewhere in the maze. 3 seconds passed. 5. 7. On the platforms above, cadets shifted restlessly. Someone muttered, "She is frozen." Then Alara moved. She did not run. She did not charge toward the sound of the constructs. She moved sideways, low and fast, sliding behind a broken pillar and pressing her back against it. She crouched until her profile was as small as possible, and she waited. The first construct appeared at the far end of a corridor. It was humanoid in shape, scaled to match a human opponent, smaller than the ones that had fought Torvan but faster. It scanned the area with sensor eyes that glowed red in the dim light. It stepped forward, weapon arms raised. It did not see Alara. She was behind it. She had moved through the maze in a path that put her at the construct's blind side, using the walls and shadows as cover. When the construct passed her position, she struck. She did not hit it with brute force. She could not match the raw power of a Korvathi or a Drelith. Instead, she moved with a precision that was almost surgical. She closed the distance in 2 quick steps, grabbed the construct's weapon arm at the joint, and twisted it backward while simultaneously driving her knee into the hinge point at the construct's midsection. The joint buckled. The construct stumbled. Alara released the arm, spun low, and swept the construct's legs out from under it. It hit the floor hard, and she followed with a sharp downward strike to the sensor cluster on its head. The construct went dark. Elapsed time from first contact to neutralization. 4 seconds. The chamber above was silent. The second construct came from behind a wall to Alara's left. She heard it before she saw it, the faint whir of servos, the click of mechanical feet on the floor. She did not turn to face it directly. Instead, she grabbed the arm of the fallen construct, wrenched it free from the body with a sharp twist, and used it as an improvised weapon. When the second construct rounded the corner, she drove the broken arm into the gap between its chest plate and its neck assembly. The construct staggered, sparking and twitching. Alara kicked it hard in the midsection, sending it backward into the wall, and then closed the distance to finish it with 2 quick strikes to its head. Elapsed time. 6 seconds. On the observation platform, the senior Korvathi cadet who had bet 20 credits slowly closed his mouth. Beside him, his companion had gone very still. Drethka watched without expression, but her cybernetic hand had tightened around the data pad hard enough to crack the casing. The simulation escalated. 3 constructs appeared simultaneously, moving in a coordinated triangle formation. They were faster now, their movements more fluid, their attack patterns more complex. They converged on Alara's last known position from 3 different angles, but Alara was not there. She had moved the moment the second construct fell, slipping through a gap in the maze wall and repositioning herself on the far side of the arena. The construct swept through the corridor where she had been, found nothing, and began to spread out to search. Alara used the time. She studied their movement patterns from cover, watching how they communicated, how they signaled each other when clearing corners. She identified the leader of the group, the one that moved slightly ahead of the others, and seemed to direct the formation, and she formulated a plan that took exactly 3 seconds to develop and 7 seconds to execute. She broke cover, not toward the constructs, but away from them, moving fast through a narrow corridor that led to a dead end. It looked like a mistake. It looked like panic. The constructs detected her and pursued. They funneled into the narrow corridor, the leader first, the other two close behind. The corridor was narrow enough that they could not stand side by side. They had to move single file. That was what Alara wanted. She reached the dead end, turned, and faced them. The lead construct was 3 meters away, charging. Alara dropped to the ground, flat on her back, and the construct's sweeping strike passed over her by inches. She kicked upward with both feet, hitting the construct in the lower torso and redirecting its momentum over her and into the wall behind. While it was off balance, she rolled sideways, came up in a crouch, and faced the second construct. The second construct swung. Alara ducked under the blow, grabbed the construct's leg, and pulled. The construct fell forward. Alara used its falling body as a shield, shoving it into the path of the third construct. The two constructs collided. In the moment of confusion, Alara vaulted over the tangled pair, landed on the far side, and attacked the first construct, which was still recovering from its impact with the wall. She struck it 3 times in rapid succession, targeting the same joint each time until the joint failed and the construct collapsed. She turned back to the other two. They had separated and were coming at her from either side of the corridor. The space was tight. There was no room to maneuver. Alara did something that no other cadet had done during the entire assessment. She jumped. She planted 1 foot on the low wall beside her, pushed off, and launched herself upward. Her hands caught the top edge of the corridor wall, and she pulled herself up and over in a single motion. She landed on the other side, sprinted along the top of the wall, and dropped down behind the two constructs. Before they could turn, she attacked them from behind, targeting the exposed wiring at the base of their skulls. Both went down in seconds. Elapsed time for the 3 construct engagement, 22 seconds. On the observation platforms, no one was speaking, no one was betting. The senior cadets were leaning forward, their hands gripping the railings. Instructors who had been reviewing data pads had stopped and were watching the arena floor with undivided attention. Drefka had not moved. Her eyes had not left the human. The simulation continued to escalate. 4 constructs, then 5. They came faster, hit harder, moved with increasingly sophisticated tactics. They tried to corner her, to cut off her escape routes, to overwhelm her with simultaneous attacks from multiple directions. Alara adapted to every escalation. She used the environment as a weapon, collapsing a weakened pillar onto a group of constructs, luring them into narrow spaces where their numbers became a disadvantage, using fallen construct parts as shields and weapons. She fought with a relentless creativity that the simulation's algorithms struggled to predict. Every time the system adapted to her tactics, she changed them. Every time it blocked one path, she found another. She was not the fastest fighter in the chamber that day. She was not the strongest. She did not have enhanced senses or natural armor or reflexes honed by millions of years of predatory evolution, but she had something else. She had the ability to think under pressure with a clarity that bordered on unnatural. She had the capacity to absorb information, process it, and act on it faster than any construct or algorithm expected from a species classified as physically average. And she had an endurance, not physical but mental, that simply did not break. The constructs hit her. She took damage. A blow to her shoulder that would have cracked a lesser bone. A strike to her leg that left her limping for 3 steps before she adjusted her stance and kept fighting. A hit to her ribs that made her gasp but did not make her stop. She absorbed pain the way a sponge absorbs water, acknowledging it, incorporating it, and continuing. The minutes ticked by. 10, 12, 15. The simulation escalated to elite-tier constructs, the same level that had ended Torvan's session. 6 of them, fast, armored, and coordinated. They entered the arena in a formation that left no gaps, no blind spots. They moved toward Alara with the precision of a closing fist. Alara was breathing hard. There was blood on her face from a cut above her eye. Her left arm hung at a slightly wrong angle where a construct had wrenched it during a grapple. She was limping on her right leg. She looked at the 6 constructs approaching, and she did not yield. She moved. What happened next lasted less than 40 seconds. But in those 40 seconds, every cadet and every instructor in that chamber saw something they would never forget. They saw a human being, beaten and bleeding and outmatched in every measurable physical category, Dismantle an elite combat squad using nothing but pain tolerance, environmental awareness, and a refusal to accept the outcome that every statistic said was inevitable. She used the constructs against each other, baiting strikes that hit other constructs instead of her, tangling their limbs, creating moments of confusion that she exploited with savage efficiency. She collapsed a wall section onto 3 of them at once. She ripped a weapon attachment from a fallen construct and used it to disable another. And when the last 2 came at her together, she met them head-on, taking a hit that sent her sliding across the floor, then rising, closing the distance, and putting them both down with strikes aimed at the exact spots where their armor was weakest. The last construct fell. The simulation held for a moment, waiting for the next wave. Then Ilara's legs buckled, and she dropped to one knee. "Yield," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, and completely without emotion. The urban maze faded, and the flat arena floor returned. The lights came back up, and Ilara knelt in the center of the chamber, alone, bleeding, and breathing in slow, controlled patterns. Elapsed time: 19 minutes, 47 seconds. Constructs neutralized: 31. The score appeared on the holographic display. It was higher than Torvan's. The chamber remained silent for a long, stretched moment. Then, from somewhere on the observation platform, a single Sindari cadet began to tap their hand against the railing. The sound was soft, rhythmic, the Sindari equivalent of applause. Another joined. Then another. The Korvathi did not applaud. They did not speak. They stared at the human kneeling on the arena floor with expressions that none of them fully understood, something between disbelief and the first cold touch of a feeling they had never experienced before. It was the feeling of being outperformed by something they had been certain was beneath them. Torvan stood on the observation platform with his arms crossed. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes had not left Ilara since the simulation began, and they did not leave her now. He watched as she rose slowly to her feet, wiped the blood from her face with the back of her hand, and walked back toward the line of cadets without looking at anyone. Drevka looked down at the cracked datapad in her cybernetic hand. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then said, very quietly to the officer beside her, "I was wrong." "What do we do?" Drevka watched Ilara's retreating back. The human walked with a slight limp and a damaged arm, but her spine was straight, and her head was level. "We watch her," Drevka said, very carefully. The rankings were posted on the wall outside the mess hall, before the midday meal. A holographic display projected the names and scores in sharp white text against a dark blue background, visible from every angle and impossible to ignore. Cadets gathered around it in clusters, some pushing forward to find their names, others hanging back, already knowing where they had landed, and not wanting to confirm it publicly. Ilara did not go to look at the rankings. She went to the medical bay. The Academy's medical wing was staffed by a team of multi-species physicians, each one trained to treat the biological needs of every sentient species enrolled. When Ilara walked through the door, the attending physician, a tall, narrow-bodied Theshan with 6 delicate fingers on each hand and skin the color of pale moonlight, looked up from a console and blinked twice. "Human," the physician said, not as a greeting, but as a statement of classification. They gestured toward an examination table. "Sit." Ilara sat. The physician scanned her with a handheld diagnostic device, moving it slowly over her body. The device chirped and beeped, painting a picture of the damage she had sustained. The physician studied the readout with growing interest. "Your left shoulder is dislocated," they said. "You have 2 cracked ribs on your right side. There is a deep laceration above your left eye that requires closure. Your right knee has sustained ligament damage that will require rest. And your cortisol and adrenaline levels are significantly elevated." They paused and looked at Ilara directly. "You walked here from the simulation chamber on a damaged knee. Why did you not request transport? It is not far." The physician stared at her for a moment, then shook their head and began treatment. They reset her shoulder with a quick, practiced motion that made Ilara's jaw clench but did not draw a sound from her. They sealed the cut above her eye with a medical adhesive that bonded the skin together in seconds. They applied a regenerative compress to her ribs and injected a stabilizing compound into her knee. "Your species heals remarkably quickly compared to baseline galactic averages," the physician noted while working. "Your bone density is moderate, but your tissue recovery rate is above standard." "Interesting." Ilara did not respond to the observation. She sat quietly while the physician finished their work, accepted a small packet of analgesic compounds, and walked back out into the corridor. The corridor was not empty. Gorok was leaning against the wall opposite the medical bay door, his massive arms folded across his chest. He straightened when Alara emerged. "You are hurt," he said. "I was treated," Alara replied. Gorok fell into step beside her as she walked. His strides were long and slow, deliberately shortened to match her pace. He was silent for several steps, which was unusual for him. Then he said, 31 constructs. Alara said nothing. "I defeated 18. My brother defeated 15. Torvan, the best Draelith anyone has seen in cycles, defeated 23. He paused. "You defeated 31. Constructs were calibrated for a human, Alara said. They were smaller and slower than the ones Torvan faced. Alara took 2 more steps before she realized he had stopped and turned to look at him. "I watched your session," he said. "Every cadet in the chamber watched your session. Those constructs were not easy. They escalated to the same elite tier that brought Torvan down, and you fought through them. Do not stand there and tell me the calibration made it simple." Alara looked at him for a long moment. Something in his expression had shifted from the teasing condescension of the previous night to something more complicated. It was not respect exactly. Not yet. It was the beginning of a question that he did not yet know how to ask. "I was lucky," Alara said. Then she turned and continued walking. Gorok watched her go. He scratched the back of his neck where his bone armor met his skin, a gesture his species made when they were confused, and then followed her to the mess hall. Inside the mess hall, the atmosphere had changed. The casual loudness of the previous evening was gone. The room was quieter, the conversations more subdued, and the reason was clear. The rankings on the wall outside had reshuffled every assumption the cadets had brought with them to the academy. Names that should have been at the top were in the middle. Species that should have dominated had been outperformed, and at the very top of the list, above Torvan, above every Korvathian, Sindari, and Draelith in the class, was a name that nobody recognized. Voss. Alara. Human. Rank. First. Alara walked to her usual spot at the far end of a table and sat down with her tray. The food was the same as before, a protein block, nutrient broth, and the clay-textured bread. She ate in silence. But the silence around her was different now. Other cadets were watching her, some openly, some trying to be subtle about it. The Korvathi cadets who had been loudest the day before were notably quiet. The Sindari were exchanging rapid clicks among themselves, their 4 eyes frequently darting toward the human at the end of the table. And across the room, at the Draelith table, Torvan sat with his back straight and his meal untouched, his gaze fixed on nothing. A Korvathi cadet from another barracks, the same one who had called Alara a prey animal the night before, stood up from his table and walked toward her. He was large, even by Korvathi standards, with thick bone armor along his arms and a jaw that could crack stone. His name was Drenok, and he had scored in the upper third of the rankings, but nowhere near the top. He stopped beside Alara's table and looked down at her. She did not look up. "The simulation was wrong," he said. His voice was loud enough to carry across the nearby tables. "The human calibration is outdated. Everyone knows it. Your constructs were weaker. Your score is inflated." Alara took a bite of her protein block and chewed. "You do not belong here," Drenok continued. "You belong on your little wet planet with the rest of your fragile species. The Academy made a mistake letting you in, and the sooner everyone realizes that, the sooner we can stop pretending this is something it is not." Alara swallowed her food. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Then she looked up at Drenok. "What is your rank?" she asked. The question was simple, delivered without malice or aggression, but it landed like a blade. Drenok's jaw tightened. His rank was 17th. Not bad, but not exceptional. And certainly not first. "My rank is not the issue," he said, his voice rising slightly. "It is the only issue," Alara said. "You can request a recalibration review if you believe the simulation was unfair. Commander Drethka has authority to order one. Go ask her." She turned back to her food. Drenok stood there for several seconds, his fists clenched at his sides. The entire mess hall was watching now. Every cadet, every species, every table. The silence was thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. Then a voice broke it. "She is right." It came from the Draelith table. Torvan had not raised his voice, but the deep resonance of it carried clearly across the room. Every head turned toward him. If the calibration was unfair, file a complaint, Torvan said. He was still looking at nothing, his arms resting on the table, his posture relaxed. If you cannot beat a human score, the problem is not the simulation. The problem is you. Drenok looked at Torvan. His jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to his table without another word. The mess hall slowly returned to its normal volume, but the tone had shifted permanently. Something had been established. A new order that nobody had expected and that most cadets did not yet know how to process. The human was not just present. She was ranked above them. And the best fighter among them had just publicly refused to dismiss her. After the meal, the cadets were given 2 hours of unstructured time before the afternoon training block began. Most returned to their barracks or went to the common areas to recover from the assessment. Alara went somewhere else. She found an empty training room on the 3rd sublevel, a small space with padded walls and a single equipment rack. It was clearly a secondary room, used for individual practice when the main facilities were occupied. The equipment was old but serviceable. Weighted bars, resistance bands, a training dummy with replaceable target pads. Alara closed the door behind her and stood in the center of the room. She was alone for the first time since arriving at the academy. The silence was complete. No voices, no vibrating alarms, no hum of constructs, just her own breathing and the faint buzz of the overhead lights. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, she let the mask slip. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the accumulated tension of the past 24 hours. The strain of the simulation, the pressure of being watched, the constant calculation of how to move and speak and exist in a place that had been built for being stronger and faster and harder than her. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed until the trembling stopped. Then she opened her eyes, walked to the training dummy, and began to work. She hit the dummy with precise, controlled strikes, targeting the same spots she had aimed for on the constructs. She practiced transitions, moving from one target to the next without wasted motion. She worked on her footwork, drilling the lateral movements and directional changes that had kept her alive in the simulation. She practiced falling and recovering, throwing herself to the floor and getting back up in a single motion, over and over, until the movement was so automatic that it required no conscious thought. She trained for 90 minutes, no breaks, no water, no rest. When she finally stopped, her training uniform was dark with sweat, and her muscles were burning with fatigue. But her movements in the final minutes were sharper and faster than they had been in the first minutes. That was the thing about Alara. She did not degrade under strain. She sharpened. She was about to leave the training room when the door opened. Scylla stood in the doorway, her 4 eyes studying Alara with an expression that was difficult to read. The Sundari stepped inside and let the door close behind her. "I thought I would find you here," Scylla said. "Or somewhere like here." Alara waited. "You train alone," Scylla observed. "Yes, even after achieving the highest score in the assessment. That is precisely why." Scylla tilted her head. Among the Sundari, this was a gesture of intellectual interest, equivalent to a human leaning forward. "Explain." Alara wiped the sweat from her face with a towel that had been hanging on the equipment rack. "The score means nothing if I cannot maintain it. It only means something if it becomes the standard, not the exception." Scylla considered this. Her lower pair of eyes blinked slowly while her upper pair remained fixed on Alara. "You think the other cadets expect you to fail? High first scores create targets. Every cadet who is outranked today is now motivated to outperform me in the next assessment. If I rest now, I lose the advantage. Your body is injured. The physician treated you less than 2 hours ago. My body recovers while I train. My mind degrades while I rest." Scylla stared at her for several long seconds. Then she said, "My species processes visual information 4 times faster than most sentient beings. We see things others miss. We read body language, micro-expressions, and physiological signals that are invisible to the naked eye of other species." She paused. "When you entered the simulation today, I saw something I did not expect. Your heart rate did not increase. Not before the first construct appeared. Not during the fight. Not even when the elite constructs entered the arena. Your heart rate stayed within a range that, for a human, indicates focused calm. The only time it spiked was after the simulation ended, when you were walking back to the line.
Elora said nothing.
But something behind her eyes shifted, a small tightening, as if a curtain had been briefly pulled aside and then drawn shut again. "That is not normal," Scylla said. "Not for any species." The physiological stress response is universal. Every sentient being experiences elevated heart rate during life-threatening combat. What you did today suggests either a medical anomaly or a level of stress conditioning that goes beyond standard military training. The silence between them was heavy. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, somewhere above them. Through layers of stone and metal, the academy continued its daily routine. But in this small training room, two cadets stood facing each other across a divide that was wider than species or rank. Alara looked at Scylla. Her expression was neutral, controlled, a wall built of stillness and silence. But her voice, when she spoke, carried a weight that had nothing to do with volume. "Where I come from," she said, "the thing that kills you fastest is not the danger. It is the reaction to it. Panic costs time. Fear costs focus. The people who survive are the ones who learn to set those things aside and deal with them later." She rolled the towel into a tight cylinder and placed it back on the rack. "I learned that young." Illa's four eyes blinked in unison, a Sindari expression of deep understanding. She did not ask for more detail. Among her species, pressing for personal information that had not been freely offered was considered a profound breach of social protocol. Instead, she said, "I would like to train with you, if you will allow it." Elara looked at her. The request was unexpected. Since arriving at the academy, every interaction Elara had experienced had been rooted in either dismissal or curiosity. This was different. This was something practical.
Why?
Elara asked. "Because I scored below you today, and I do not intend for that to remain the case. But more importantly, because you see things that I miss, and I suspect I see things that you miss. That combination has tactical value." Elara studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. Once, a small motion that most people would have missed entirely. Scylla nodded back. "Tomorrow, same time." She turned and left the training room. The door closed behind her, and Elara was alone again. She stood in the silence for a long moment. Then she sat on the floor, cross-legged, and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped. The pain in her ribs and knee and shoulder faded to background noise, still present but no longer relevant. She thought about the assessment. She thought about the constructs, their movement patterns, their attack sequences, the moments where the simulation had adjusted to her tactics and forced her to improvise. She replayed each engagement in her mind, cataloguing what had worked, what had been wasteful, where she had been lucky rather than skilled. She thought about Drenok's words. "The simulation was wrong. The human calibration is outdated. Your score is inflated." She turned the words over in her mind, examining them without emotion. There was a possibility that he was partially right. The human calibration profile had not been updated in over 600 cycles. The constructs she had faced might have been underestimating her species' current capabilities, or they might have been overestimating them. There was no way to know without a formal review, but it did not matter, because the score was not the point. The score was a number on a wall. What mattered was what she had learned during the assessment, how the constructs moved, how the simulation adapted, what patterns it used to escalate difficulty. That information was far more valuable than any ranking, and it was information that she now possessed and that she would use in every future session. She thought about Torvan. His intervention in the mess hall had been unexpected. She had expected the top-ranked cadet to be hostile toward the person who had taken his position, or at least dismissive. Instead, he had defended her, or rather, he had defended the integrity of the assessment, which had the secondary effect of defending her. She noted it but did not assign it more meaning than it warranted. Alliances in places like this were fluid. Today's defender could be tomorrow's adversary. She thought about Earth, about the 47th floor, about the sound of rain on metal and the smell of recycled air, about her mother, who had worked double shifts at a water reclamation plant until her lungs gave out from the chemical exposure, about the recruiters who had offered her a way out, and the decision she had made standing in a hallway that smelled like rust and mildew, to walk through a door she could never walk back through. She thought about all of it, and then she put it away. That night, in the barracks, Gorok and Thren were unusually subdued. They spoke to each other in low voices, occasionally glancing at Alara as she prepared for sleep. Scylla lay on her bunk, reading something on a datapad, her lower eyes closed while her upper pair scanned the text at rapid speed. Gorok finally broke the quiet. Voss. Alara looked at him. How did you learn to fight like that? The question was asked without teasing or mockery. It was a genuine question from a warrior who had watched another warrior do something he did not understand. Ilara considered her answer. She could have said she was trained. She could have said she studied. She could have given him a technical explanation about human biomechanics and the compensatory tactics developed by a species that had evolved as endurance predators on a high-gravity death world. Instead, she said, I had no choice. Gorok studied her face. Then he nodded slowly, a deep, deliberate motion that carried the weight of an understanding that words could not express. Among the Korvathi, that nod was reserved for moments of recognition between equals. He turned off his lamp and lay down. The room went dark. The barracks settled into the deep quiet of night, the only sounds the distant hum of the Academy's systems and the steady breathing of 4 cadets. Ilara lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, the real training would begin. The assessment had been a measurement. What came next would be the actual forging. And forging, by its nature, involved heat and pressure and the relentless striking of metal against metal until the weakness was burned away and only the hard core remained. She was ready for it. She had been ready for it her entire life. Because the truth that no alien species understood about humans, the truth that they would not understand until they saw it with their own eyes and felt it in the cold grip of their own failing confidence, was this: humans were not built to dominate. They were not built to overpower. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced species in the galaxy. They were built to endure. And endurance, as the Valerain Academy was beginning to discover, was the most dangerous weapon in the universe. The days that followed the baseline assessment did not get easier. They got harder in ways that most cadets had not anticipated. The Academy's curriculum was not designed to test one skill at a time. It was designed to test everything at once: combat under fatigue, tactical planning under stress, decision-making under conflicting information, leadership under chaos. Each day layered new pressure onto the last, and the cracks in certain cadets began to show almost immediately. The morning after the assessment, the cadets were introduced to the Gauntlet. The Gauntlet was a live-fire obstacle course that wound through a canyon carved into the rock beneath the Academy. It was 3 kilometers long. It included vertical climbs, water crossings, narrow tunnels, unstable terrain, and 7 separate live-fire stations where automated turrets fired non-lethal but extremely painful stun rounds at anyone who moved too slowly or too predictably. The Gauntlet had to be completed within 40 minutes, and every cadet ran it alone. The Korvathi cadets attacked it with raw power, hauling themselves up the vertical sections with their massive arms and powering through the live-fire stations by using their natural bone armor to absorb the stun rounds. Gorok finished in 34 minutes, his body sparking with residual charge from 6 stun hits. Bren finished in 37, cursing the entire way. The Sindari used their speed. Scylla blazed through the Gauntlet in 29 minutes, her 4 eyes tracking the turret patterns while her body flowed through the obstacles like water pouring through cracks. She took 0 stun hits, the only cadet in the class to achieve a clean run. Tar Van finished in 26 minutes. He did not avoid the stun rounds. He did not need to. His Draelus scales absorbed them without slowing his stride. He ran the course with the mechanical precision of a machine, each movement calibrated for maximum efficiency. When he crossed the finish line, he was not breathing hard. Elora finished in 38 minutes. She took 4 stun hits, each one causing her entire body to seize for a half second before she forced herself to keep moving. She was the slowest finisher in the upper half of the class. Her time was not impressive. Her technique was not elegant. She crawled through sections where other species walked. She pulled herself over walls that others vaulted. She waded through water crossings that reached her chest but only reached the waists of the Korvathi beside her. But she finished, and the way she finished revealed something that the pure numbers did not capture. Every stun hit she took, she recovered from faster than the previous one, not because the pain was less, but because she was teaching her body to process it more efficiently in real time. Her pace over the last kilometer was faster than her pace over the first, which was the opposite of what the instructors expected from a species with no natural endurance enhancements. She was not slowing down as the course wore on. She was accelerating. The instructors noticed. They did not comment publicly, but the data was flagged in Alara's file with a note that read, "Anomalous endurance pattern. Recommend continued observation." After the gauntlet, the cadets were given a 30-minute recovery period and then sent directly into a tactical theory classroom on the upper level of the classroom was built like a war room, with a massive holographic table in the center that could project three-dimensional battlefields in exacting detail. The instructor was a retired Sindari field commander named Kellis, who had lost her left arm and two of her four eyes in a border conflict and now walked with a prosthetic support frame that clicked and hummed with every step. Kellis did not waste time with introductions. She activated the holographic table and projected a scenario, a planetary defense engagement where a small garrison force was defending a civilian population center against an advancing enemy army that outnumbered them 4-1. "You have 600 soldiers," Kellis said. "The enemy has 2,400. They are approaching from the north across open ground. Your position is a city built on a river. You have 12 hours before they arrive. What do you do?" She pointed at a Korvathi cadet in the front row. "You speak." The Korvathi cadet stood. He was broad and confident. "Fortify the northern perimeter. Build barriers using the city infrastructure. Concentrate all forces on the main approach and hold the line." Kellis looked at him with her two remaining eyes. "And when they flank you?" The cadet hesitated. "We reinforce the flanks with reserve units." "You have no reserves. You have 600 soldiers against 2,400. If you put everyone on the north wall, your south, east, and west are undefended. They send a detachment around your position, and you are surrounded. You lose. Sit down." The Korvathi sat. His neck flushed dark with embarrassment. Kellis pointed at a Sindari cadet. "You." The Sindari stood. "Split forces into mobile groups. Use hit-and-run tactics from multiple positions within the city. Avoid direct engagement and bleed the enemy as they advance through urban terrain." Kellis nodded slowly. "Better. But your enemy has 4 times your numbers. They can afford to take losses. You cannot. Every soldier you lose in a hit-and-run engagement reduces your total combat power by a larger percentage than their losses reduce theirs. Attrition favors the larger force. Eventually, you run out of soldiers. What then?" The Sindari did not have an answer. She sat down. Kellis looked around the room. Her gaze landed on Alara, who was sitting in the back row as usual, her datapad open but untouched, her eyes fixed on the holographic map. "Human, you have been quiet. What would you do?" Every head in the room turned toward Alara. She did not stand immediately. She looked at the map for a moment longer, studying the terrain, the river, the city layout, the open ground to the north. Then she stood. "I would not defend the city," she said. The room stirred. Kellis raised what remained of her left eyebrow. "Explain." Ilara walked to the holographic table. She touched the controls on the edge, and the projection zoomed in on the river that ran through the center of the city. "The objective is to protect the civilian population. The city is the current location of the population, but it is not the only possible location. The river runs south for approximately 40 kilometers before entering a mountain range with extensive cave systems." She traced the route on the map. "I would begin evacuating the civilian population south along the river immediately. All 600 soldiers would be divided into 3 groups." She touched the map and placed markers at 3 locations. Group 1. 200 soldiers holds the northern approach with visible defenses. Their job is not to stop the enemy. Their job is to look like a full garrison defending the city. They create the appearance of a standard defensive position. This delays the enemy advance because the attacking commander will expect resistance and plan accordingly. They will spend time forming up, scouting, and preparing for an assault that will be easier than they expect. Every hour they spend planning is an hour the civilians are moving south. She moved to the second marker. Group 2. 200 soldiers sets demolition charges along the city's main infrastructure. Bridges, power systems, water treatment, communication relays. When the enemy enters the city, Group 2 detonates the charges and collapses the urban environment onto the advancing forces. This turns the city from an asset into a weapon. The enemy takes the city, but what they take is rubble. She moved to the third marker. Group 3. 200 soldiers escorts the civilian population south and establishes a defensive position at the mountain passes. The mountains provide natural fortification. 200 soldiers in prepared mountain positions can hold against a force 10 times their size for days, possibly weeks. By the time the enemy regroups from the demolitions and advances south, the civilians are underground and the defensive position is established. She stepped back from the table. Total civilian casualties from direct combat, 0. Total soldier casualties from Group 1, high, but their sacrifice buys 12 to 18 hours of evacuation time. Total enemy casualties from urban demolition, significant and demoralizing. Final defensive position, sustainable and supply line friendly due to the river. Keller stood very still, her prosthetic frame humming softly. Her 2 remaining eyes were wide, and the expression on her face was something that most cadets had never seen from her before. It was the expression of a teacher who had just heard the answer she had spent years waiting for. That, Keller said slowly, is a human answer. Elara looked at her. I do not understand. You just sacrificed a third of your force without hesitation. You turned your own city into a bomb. You abandoned the ground to save the people. Most species in this room would have fought to hold the city because the city represents power, territory, control. You threw it away like it was nothing. Kellis paused. That kind of thinking is what makes humans dangerous. Not because you are willing to die, every species is willing to die. Because you are willing to lose in order to win. Elara said nothing. She returned to her seat and sat down. The classroom discussion continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. Cadets who had dismissed the human after the gauntlet, where her physical performance had been unremarkable, were now recalculating. The assessment had shown her combat ability. The tactical exercise had shown something different. A mind that operated on principles that did not align with how other species thought about warfare. Humans did not think about war the way Korvathi did, as a contest of strength. They did not think about it the way Sindari did, as a puzzle of speed and information. They did not think about it the way Dreliths did, as an expression of natural superiority. Humans thought about war the way prey animals thought about predators. Not how do I fight this, but how do I survive this? And that survival instinct, honed over tens of thousands of years on a planet that tried to kill them every day, produced a tactical creativity that no other species could predict. The afternoon brought the first team-based exercise. The cadets were divided into squads of 5 and sent into a multi-room simulation that required them to work together to complete a series of objectives. The objectives were simple on paper: capture 3 control points, eliminate a set number of hostile constructs, and extract to a designated point. But the simulation was designed to create friction between team members by making the optimal strategy for one objective conflict with the optimal strategy for another. Elara's squad consisted of herself, Scylla, Gorak, a Drelith named Veska, and a Sundari cadet named Ithran. The team was mixed by design, forcing different species to cooperate under pressure. Eska! The Drelith immediately assumed command. This was expected. Dreliths had a cultural predisposition toward leadership, and Veska carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had been raised to give orders. She was tall, lean, and moved with the same fluid precision as Torvan, though her scales were lighter in color, a pale blue-green that shifted in the light. Standard formation, Veska said, projecting the map of the simulation environment from a wrist-mounted display. I take point. The Korvathi take second position for heavy engagement. The Sindari cover the flanks. The human stays in the rear. Gorak nodded. Ithran, the Sindari, clicked in affirmative. Scylla glanced at Elara, but said nothing. Elara looked at the map. The 3 control points were spread across a large, multi-level complex. The first was on the ground floor, the second was 2 levels up, and the third was underground. Hostile constructs were positioned throughout the complex in patterns that Elara recognized from the simulation architecture she had studied during the baseline assessment. The third control point is a trap, Elara said. Veska looked at her. Her expression was not hostile, but it was not warm either. Explain. The underground level is narrow and has limited exits. The simulation places construct reinforcements in the corridors behind the team once they pass through. If we go underground last, We will be fighting enemies on two fronts in a confined space with no retreat path. We should take the underground point first, while the construct density is lower, and work our way up. Veska considered this. Her pale eyes narrowed. The standard approach is to secure the ground level first. It provides a fallback position. The standard approach assumes we will need to fall back, Ilara said. If we take the underground point first and move up, we never need a fallback. We hold the high ground after each capture, and the constructs have to fight upward against us. The silence stretched. Veska looked at the map again. She ran through the logic in her head, her jaw working slightly as she processed the information. Then she looked at Elara with an expression that was equal parts irritation and grudging acknowledgement. "Underground first," she said. "Move!" The squad entered the simulation. The environment materialized around them. A sprawling industrial complex with metal walls, exposed piping, and harsh overhead lighting that flickered at irregular intervals. The air was thick with artificial haze designed to reduce visibility. Alara's strategy proved correct. The underground level was lightly defended when they arrived, and Goruk's raw strength made quick work of the constructs guarding the control point. They captured it in under 4 minutes and moved to the stairwell leading up. As they ascended, they could hear the sounds of construct reinforcements flooding into the underground level behind them. The corridors they had just cleared were now filled with enemies that would have been at their backs if they had followed the standard approach. Veska glanced back, then looked at Alara. She did not say anything, but the look carried an acknowledgement that did not need words. The second control point was harder. The constructs on the upper level were elite tier, faster and more coordinated than the ones below. Veska fought at the front with devastating skill, her Drelith reflexes allowing her to dodge and counter with fluid precision. Goruk held the corridor behind them, his bone armor absorbing stun rounds while he swung his massive fists at anything that came within reach. Ithran and Scylla worked the flanks, their speed keeping the constructs off balance. Alara operated in the spaces between. She did not try to match the frontline fighters. Instead, she moved through the gaps they created, striking at constructs that were focused on other targets, pulling aggro when a teammate was overwhelmed, and directing the squad's movements with short, precise calls that cut through the chaos. "Goruk, left corridor, 3 incoming. Scylla, the construct behind the pillar is going to flank Veska, intercept. Ithran, fall back 2 meters, you are exposed." Her voice was calm, steady, and carried just enough volume to be heard over the noise of combat. She did not shout. She did not command with authority the way Veska did. She communicated with the precision of a targeting system, delivering exactly the information each teammate needed exactly when they needed it. The squad captured the second control point in 11 minutes. No one was seriously injured. Their coordination had improved dramatically from the first engagement to the second, and the reason was clear to everyone in the squad, even if no one said it out loud. The human was not leading the team. Veska was leading the team. But the human was orchestrating it, feeding information to the leader and the fighters that allowed them to perform at a level they could not have reached alone. The third control point was on the ground floor. By this time, the simulation had concentrated its remaining constructs around the final objective, creating a fortified position that required a coordinated assault. Veska paused the squad at the entrance to the ground floor and studied the layout through a doorway. "Heavy resistance," she said. "At least 12 constructs in defensive positions around the control point. Overlapping fields of fire, no clear approach." Goruk cracked his knuckles. "I can push through. You will be neutralized before you reach the second row," Veska said. "They have crossfire from 3 positions. Even your armor cannot absorb that many simultaneous hits." Ithran clicked nervously. "We could try to draw them out, create an opening." "They are in defensive mode. They will not pursue," Scylla said. "Their programming prioritizes holding the objective." The squad looked at each other. Then, one by one, they looked at Ilara. She was standing slightly behind the group, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. She was breathing slowly, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed disconnected from the tension around her. After a moment, she opened her eyes. "There is an industrial ventilation system that runs through the ceiling of the ground floor. The ductwork connects to the room where the control point is located. The ducts are too small for Corvath or Drelith, and too narrow for Sindari's shoulder width." She looked at them. "They are the right size for a human." Veska stared at her. "You want to go in alone through the ventilation system?" "Not alone. I want the 4 of you to create a distraction at the main entrance. Draw their fire forward. When their attention is focused on you, I will enter from above, activate the control point, and the simulation ends. The control point requires a 5-second activation hold, Veska said. 5 seconds surrounded by 12 elite constructs. Surrounded by 12 constructs who are looking the other way, Alara said. If you keep their attention for those 5 seconds, I can do it. Veska opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She looked at the doorway, at the fortified position beyond, and at the small human standing beside her with an expression of absolute calm. If they detect you in the vents, you will be alone with no backup in an enclosed space, Veska said.
Yes.
If we cannot hold their attention for 5 full seconds, you will be neutralized.
Yes.
You are injured. Your shoulder, your ribs, your knee.
Alara looked at her.
That does not change the math. I am the only one who fits. Eska held her gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to the rest of the squad. We hit the front. Maximum noise, maximum aggression. Keep every construct focused on us. 5 seconds. That is all she needs. Gorek grinned. It was the widest grin Ilara had seen from him. 5 seconds. We can give her 5 seconds. Ilara nodded and moved to the wall. She found the ventilation access panel, pulled it open with her good hand, and climbed inside. The duct was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for her shoulders. She moved through it silently, her body pressed flat, her breathing controlled. She could hear the sounds of the simulation below her, the hum of the constructs, the faint clicking of their patrol patterns. She reached the vent above the control point and looked down through the grating. She could see the 12 constructs arranged in a defensive semicircle around the objective. The control point itself was a raised platform with a glowing activation panel. 5 seconds of contact to capture it. She waited. Below, on the far side of the room, the main door exploded inward. Gorek came through first, roaring in Korvathi, his massive frame drawing every construct's attention like a lightning rod. Veska followed, her Drelith speed carrying her into the nearest construct before it could react. Scylla and Ithran flanked wide, firing stun rounds and moving constantly to present multiple targets. The constructs turned, all 12 of them oriented toward the entrance, their weapons tracking the 4 fighters who were pouring through the door in a storm of noise and violence. Alara dropped. She fell from the vent, landed on the activation platform in a crouch, and slammed both hands onto the glowing panel. The panel pulsed under her palms. A countdown began. 5 seconds. 2 constructs at the edge of the formation detected her. They turned, their weapons oriented toward her back. 4 seconds. Gorek threw himself forward with a roar, crashing into one of the turning constructs with enough force to send it tumbling across the floor. Scylla appeared from the side, her body a blur of motion, and drove a kick into the second construct's knee joint, buckling it. 3 seconds. A 3rd construct broke from the formation and lunged toward the platform. It was fast, faster than anything Ilara could dodge from her current position. She saw it coming in her peripheral vision and did the only thing she could do. She stayed. She kept her hands on the panel and let it come. 2 seconds. Veska intercepted. She appeared as a streak of pale blue-green scales, her body slamming into the construct at full Drelith speed. The impact sent both of them crashing into the wall. Veska hit the floor hard but rolled to her feet immediately, her eyes wild with adrenaline. 1 second. The panel flashed. The activation completed. A chime rang through the simulation chamber, and the word "Objective complete" appeared in glowing text above the platform. The constructs froze. The simulation dissolved. The industrial complex faded, and the blank arena floor returned. The 5 squad members stood in the empty space, breathing hard, bruised and battered, but victorious. The squad's completion time was posted on the display. They had finished the exercise faster than any other squad in the class, and with the lowest total damage sustained. Veska stood in the center of the arena, her chest heaving. She looked at Alara, who was still kneeling on the platform where the control point had been, her hands pressed flat against the floor. The human's face was pale with pain, her body trembling slightly from the accumulated strain of the day. Veska walked over to her and extended a hand. Alara looked up. She looked at the hand, then at the Drelith who offered it. Then she reached up and took it. Veska pulled her to her feet with a strength that was gentle despite its power. "Next time," Veska said, "you plan, I execute." It was the highest compliment a Drelith could give. It was an acknowledgement that another being's mind was worth more than their own body. Alara nodded. From the observation platform, Drethka watched the exchange. The data pad in her cybernetic hand displayed the squad's performance metrics, efficiency ratings, coordination scores, individual contributions. One entry was highlighted in red, flagged by the system for special attention. It read, Cadet Voss, Ilara. Role, unclassified. Combat contribution, moderate. Tactical contribution, exceptional. Team effectiveness multiplier when present, 247%. Drethka read the number twice. Then she closed the data pad and stared at the arena floor where the human was walking away, limping slightly, her head level, her spine straight. 247%. The human did not just fight well. She made everyone around her fight better. She was not a weapon. She was a force multiplier. And force multipliers, in the long history of galactic warfare, were the rarest and most valuable assets any military could possess. Drethka made a note in her personal log. It was one word, underlined twice. Watch. The weeks that followed reshaped the academy in ways that no instructor had predicted and no cadet had prepared for. The quiet human at the end of the line was no longer invisible. She could not be. Every ranking update, every tactical exercise, every training simulation confirmed what the baseline assessment had first suggested. Ilara Voss was not an anomaly. She was a pattern, and patterns, once established, could not be ignored. She did not become the loudest voice in the room. She did not seek attention or dominance. She remained the same quiet, watchful presence she had been on the first day, sitting at the far end of the mess hall table, walking at the back of the group, speaking only when she had something to say. But the meaning of that silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of irrelevance. It was the silence of someone who did not need to speak, because her actions spoke with a volume that drowned out every other voice in the building. Her training sessions with Scylla became a fixed part of her daily routine. Every evening, after the structured training was over and most cadets retreated to their barracks or the common areas, Ilara and Scylla met in the small training room on the third sublevel. They worked for 90 minutes without rest, alternating between physical drills and tactical analysis. Scylla brought her visual processing abilities to the partnership. She could observe Ilara's movements and identify inefficiencies that were invisible to the naked eye. A fraction of a second of hesitation in a transition, a slight over-rotation in a turn, a hand placement that was 2 centimeters off optimal. She provided real-time feedback with the precision of a diagnostic system, and Ilara absorbed every correction without complaint or ego. In return, Ilara brought something that Scylla had never encountered in a training partner: creativity under constraint. Scylla's combat style was elegant and efficient, built on generations of Sindari martial tradition that emphasized speed, timing, and visual superiority. It was excellent, but it was predictable. Any opponent who had studied Sindari combat patterns could anticipate her movements within a few exchanges. Ilara taught Scylla to break her own patterns. She introduced drills that forced the Sindari to fight in ways that contradicted her training, using close-quarters grappling instead of distance strikes, fighting with her lower eyes closed to simulate visual impairment, engaging targets from angles that felt unnatural and wrong. Scylla resisted at first. The drills felt clumsy and counterproductive, but within 2 weeks her combat scores began to climb. She was no longer just fast and precise. She was unpredictable, and unpredictability, as Ilara explained to her one evening while they sat on the training room floor catching their breath, was the one advantage that could not be countered by superior physicality. Every species has a combat doctrine, Ilara said. Corvati, overwhelmed. Sindari outmaneuver. Turalis outclass. If you fight within your doctrine, your enemy only needs to solve one problem. If you fight outside your doctrine, your enemy has to solve a new problem every time you move. And what is human doctrine? Ilara smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, gone almost before it appeared, but it was the first time Scylla had seen the human smile at all. We use whatever works. We steal techniques from every species, every system, every environment. We adapt in real time. We are not specialists. We are generalists. And a generalist who fights a specialist on the specialist's terms will lose. But a generalist who refuses to fight on anyone's terms but their own is very hard to beat. Scylla's 4 eyes blinked in slow unison. That is either brilliant or insane. On Earth, Alara said, we do not see a difference. The partnership between the human and the Sindari did not go unnoticed. Other cadets began to observe their training sessions, watching from the doorway of the small room. At first, it was just curiosity. Then, it became something more. Gorik started showing up. He would lean against the wall and watch, and then one evening, he asked if he could join. Ilara and Scylla exchanged a look, and then Ilara nodded. Gorik was a different kind of training partner. He had no subtlety. His approach to combat was straightforward and forceful, but he had a dedication to improvement that surprised Ilara. He listened when she corrected his stance. He accepted Scylla's feedback on his movement patterns. He struggled with the agility drills, his massive body rebelling against the quick directional changes. But he did not complain. He simply kept going until his body learned what his mind already understood. Within a week, Thren joined. Then Ithran. Then a Korvathi cadet from another barracks named Shail, who had watched Alara's squad exercise and wanted to understand how a mixed-species team had achieved the fastest completion time in the class. Then a Draelith named Valith, who was quiet and intense and studied Alara's techniques with the focus of a scientist observing a new species. The small training room on the third sublevel became too small. They moved to a larger space, one of the secondary simulation halls that was unused during evening hours. The group grew to 12, then 15, then 20. Alara did not organize it. She did not recruit anyone or set schedules or create a formal structure. Cadets simply showed up, and she trained with whoever was there. But something was happening that went beyond individual improvement. The cadets who trained with Alara were performing differently in their official assessments. Their scores were climbing. Their squad exercises were more effective. Their tactical decisions were faster and more creative. And the reason was not that Alara was teaching them human techniques. The reason was that Alara was teaching them to think differently, to see problems from angles their species-specific training had never considered, to combine their natural abilities with tactics borrowed from other species and other philosophies of combat. The cross-species training group, which had no official name and no formal leadership, was producing cadets who could not be classified. A Korvathi who could dodge like a Sindari, a Sindari who could hold ground like a Korvathi, a Draelith who used environmental tactics that no Draelith had ever been trained in. They were hybrid fighters, and they were outperforming their peers by margins that the Academy's ranking system could barely quantify. Drethka observed all of this. She attended several of the unofficial training sessions, standing at the back of the hall with her cybernetic arm folded behind her back, watching without comment. She reviewed the performance data. She consulted with Kellis and the other instructors, and she reached a conclusion that she shared with the Academy's commandant in a private briefing. The human is not just a high-performing cadet, Drethka said. She is restructuring how the other cadets think. She is creating a new model of multi-species combat integration that this Academy has never seen. The commandant, an ancient Velaran with silver skin and eyes that had seen more wars than most species had fought, looked at the data and said nothing for a long time. And he asked a single question. Is she aware of what she is doing? I believe she is, but I do not believe it is deliberate. She is not pursuing influence or power. She is simply doing what humans do. And what is that? They gather, they share, they adapt. And without any single individual directing the process, they collectively become something greater than the sum of their parts. It is how their species survived a homeworld that should have killed them 100 times over. They cooperate instinctively, even with beings who are nothing like them. The commandant looked at the data again. And Torvan? Drethka paused. Torvan has not joined the training group. This was true. While the unofficial training sessions had grown to include cadets from every species in the class, the top-ranked Draelith had remained apart. Torvan continued to train alone, as he always had. His performance remained exceptional. He was still among the top 3 cadets in every individual assessment, but his squad exercise scores had plateaued, while the cadets in Alara's training group continued to improve. Torvan was aware of the gap. He said nothing about it publicly, but his demeanor had shifted in the weeks since the baseline assessment. He was quieter than before, more watchful. He spent long minutes studying the rankings after each posting, not with the casual glance of someone confirming their position, but with the focused attention of someone trying to understand why the numbers were moving in directions he had not predicted. One evening, after the formal training day had ended, Alara was alone in the secondary simulation hall. The other cadets had left. She was practicing a sequence of movements she had been developing, a series of transitions designed to allow a smaller fighter to close distance against a larger opponent without exposing themselves to a direct counterattack. She moved through the sequence slowly at first, then faster, repeating it until the movements flowed into each other without conscious direction. The door to the hall opened. Torvan walked in. Alara stopped. She turned and looked at him. He stood just inside the doorway, his dark green scales catching the overhead lights, his posture straight but not rigid. He looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read, even for someone as observant as Alara. They had not spoken directly since the first day. They had existed in the same space, occupied the same rankings, breathed the same air, but they had not exchanged a single word face to face. Torvan spoke first. "I have been watching you." Alara waited. "You fight differently than any being I have trained against. You think differently. You approach problems from angles that do not exist in any tactical framework I have studied." He paused. "I do not understand you." Alara looked at him. The space between them was large, the hall empty and echoing. The lights hummed above them, casting sharp shadows across the floor. "What do you want to understand?" she asked. Torvan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "On Drelith, we are taught that combat is a reflection of essence. The way a being fights reveals who they are at their core. A coward fights like a coward. A leader fights like a leader. A predator fights like a predator." He looked directly at her. "I have watched you fight. I have studied your movements, your decisions, your tactics, and I cannot identify your essence. You do not fight like a predator. You do not fight like prey. You fight like something I have no word for." Alara held his gaze. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with the weight of two completely different evolutionary histories trying to find a common language. "On Earth," she said, "we have a word for it." "What word?" "Survivor." Torvan's expression shifted. It was subtle, a slight loosening of the muscles around his jaw, a fractional softening of the hard line of his mouth. Among Drelith, these were the signs of a deeply felt recognition, the acknowledgement that something true had been spoken. "Teach me," he said. Alara studied him. She looked at his posture, his hands, the way he held his weight. She saw the pride, deep and structural, woven into every fiber of his being. She saw the cast of what he was asking. A Drelith, the pinnacle of galactic warrior culture, asking a human, a species his people had dismissed as insignificant, to teach him something he could not learn on his own. "Training starts every evening at 1900. Bring water. I do not stop for breaks." The corner of Torvan's mouth twitched. It might have been the beginning of a smile. Among Drelith, smiling was rare and reserved for moments of genuine satisfaction. "I will be there," he said. He turned and left. The door closed behind him, and Alara stood alone in the empty hall. She closed her eyes. She breathed in the quiet, feeling it settle around her like the familiar weight of something she had carried her entire life. She thought about the 47th floor. She thought about her mother. She thought about the rain on the metal walls and the smell of rust and the sound of the recruiters telling her the galaxy was bigger than everything she knew. They had been right. The galaxy was bigger. It was filled with beings who were stronger and faster and harder than her. It was filled with species that had conquered stars while her ancestors were still learning to walk upright. It was vast and ancient and indifferent to the small, quiet girl from Earth who had no natural armor and no enhanced senses and no genetic legacy of galactic dominance. But the galaxy was also learning something. It was learning it slowly, reluctantly, with the grudging acknowledgement of beings who had spent their entire evolutionary history at the top of every hierarchy they had ever encountered. It was learning that strength was not the only measure of worth, that speed was not the only measure of ability, that the loudest voice in the room was not always the one saying the most important thing. The galaxy was learning about humans, not from books or data files or diplomatic briefings, not from the exaggerated stories that circulated on alien networks about the aggressive, emotional, chaotic species from the edge of the spiral arm. It was learning from a single girl who stood in a training hall with bruised ribs and a quiet voice, and showed them what it meant to be human. It meant adapting. It meant enduring. It meant getting up after being knocked down and finding a new way to fight, not because the old way was wrong, but because the situation demanded something the old way could not provide. It meant carrying fear inside your chest like a caged animal and using it as fuel instead of letting it become chains. It meant looking at a galaxy full of beings who were better than you in every measurable category and deciding with quiet certainty that you were going to find a way to stand among them anyway. And it meant doing all of this without asking for permission, without seeking approval, and without ever stopping. The next day, the monthly rankings were posted. Alara's name was at the top again. But the numbers beside the other names had changed. The cadets who had trained with her had risen. Scylla was now ranked 3rd. Goruk had jumped from the upper 20s to 11th. Veska had climbed from 15th to 7th. Across the entire class, the cadets in the unofficial training group had gained an average of 9 ranking positions. It was the largest collective improvement in Academy history for a single training cycle. And at the bottom of the ranking update, a new note had been added by the Commandant himself. It read, "Effective immediately, cross-species supplementary training sessions conducted by Cadet Voss are recognized as an official component of the Academy curriculum. Attendance is voluntary. Facility access is granted without restriction." Alara read the note on her way to the mess hall. She paused, read it again, and then continued walking. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She sat at her usual spot at the end of the table and began eating her protein block. But this time, she was not alone. Scylla sat beside her, and Goruk sat across from her, and Thren sat next to Goruk, and Veska sat at the end, and one by one, the table filled. Cadets from every species, from every barracks, from every corner of the class, brought their trays and sat down at the table that had been empty for weeks. And at the far end of the mess hall, walking through the door with his tray in his hands, Torvan paused. He looked at the crowded table. He looked at the small human sitting in the center of it, eating in silence while the beings around her talked and laughed and argued about the training they would do that evening. He walked over and sat down. No one commented. No one made room. They simply shifted, and there was space, as if it had always been there. Drethka stood at the entrance to the mess hall, watching. The officer beside her followed her gaze and saw the table, 23 cadets from 5 different species, sitting together around a human girl who was chewing a piece of bread that tasted like clay and not saying a word. "Commander," the officer said. "What is she?" Drethka was quiet for a long time. She watched the table, watched the cadets, watched the way they oriented around the human without consciously deciding to. The way conversations flowed through her position like water around a stone in a stream. The way the entire group seemed to move as a single organism with the quiet girl at its center. "She is what they should have sent us 600 cycles ago," Drethka said. "And what is that?" Drethka turned from the mess hall and walked away. But the officer heard her answer, spoken quietly, almost to herself, with a weight that suggested she was not just describing one cadet, but an entire species. The future. The officer looked back at the table. Alara had finished her meal. She was standing, picking up her tray, getting ready to head to the training hall for the evening session. Cadets were rising with her, falling at a step beside her, behind her, around her. They moved together, not in formation, but in something more organic, more natural. A flock, a pack, a unit bound not by orders, but by something deeper. Something that humans had been building since before they had words for it. Community. And at the head of it, small and quiet and bruised and relentless, the girl from the 47th floor walked toward the training hall with steady steps and level eyes. She had come to the academy with nothing but a broken bag and a silence that everyone had mistaken for weakness. She had been mocked for her size, dismissed for her species, and written off before she had taken a single step onto the arena floor. Now the academy was hers. Not because she had demanded it, not because she had fought for it, but because she had done the most human thing in the universe. She had refused to be what they expected, and in doing so, she had become something none of them had ever seen before. Something they could not ignore. Something they could not defeat. Something quiet and unbreakable and absolutely, terrifyingly human.